Japan in the 21st century looks nothing like the Japan of the 1940s, just as modern Germany bears no resemblance to the Nazi era. But facts are facts, and the Japan of World War II committed terrible crimes. History is full of horrors, and no country is innocent. Unfortunately, many atrocities happen when leaders encourage them, and when people know they won't face punishment. But how did Japan transform from an isolated nation to a military dictatorship capable of such horror? For over 2 centuries, from the early 1600s to the mid-1800s, Japan was cut off from the world. Foreigners were banned, and no Japanese person was allowed to leave. This all changed in 1853, when American naval officer Matthew Perry arrived with warships, forcing Japan to open its doors to international trade. When Perry's men came ashore, they were shocked. Japan had been frozen in time for 200 years. Its buildings, clothes, and even weapons were outdated compared to the Western world. Due to this exposure, Japan transformed from a backward nation to industrial powerhouse. By 1905, Japan had already won wars against China and even the mighty Russian Empire. Japan saw itself as the equal of any Western nation, but racial prejudice held them back. By World War I, Japan was allied with Western powers, but their contributions were small, and they gained little in return. This led many in Japan to blame their civilian government and the Western world for keeping Japan down. Meanwhile, Japan's cities were adopting Western customs, and that angered the conservative military leaders. In the 1930s, Japan fell under military rule, becoming a fascist state. The government promoted extreme nationalism, loyalty to the emperor, and an idea of Japanese ethnic superiority. Much like the Nazis in Europe, Japan began to view itself as superior to its neighbors. From 1931 onward, Japan expanded aggressively, first seizing Manchuria and then invading China. The occupation was brutal. The worst example was the Nanking Massacre, where the Japanese soldier massacred children and did horrific crimes against women. The most shocking aspect of Japan's atrocities was the work of Unit 731, led by Dr. Shiro Ishii. This secret military unit performed gruesome experiments on humans, mostly Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. Between 1936 and 1945, it's estimated that Unit 731 killed over 200,000 people. They tested chemical and biological weapons, infecting prisoners with deadly diseases like the plague, typhus, and smallpox. Victims were injected with poisons, exposed to radiation, and dissected while still alive, all in the name of science. When Japan surrendered in 1945, many of Unit 731's leaders, including Ishii, were arrested. However, instead of facing trial, the US gave them immunity in exchange for their research on biological warfare. Ishii lived peacefully until 1959, while the victims of his horrific experiments were forgotten by history. Even more disturbing is that some members of Unit 731 held reunions in Japan after the war, showing just how little accountability there was for their actions. Japan has come a long way since those dark times, but the memory of the horrors committed in China during World War II remains a painful chapter in history. As we reflect on this history, it's important to remember the cost of these mistakes and to ensure they are never repeated.